My sister planned for months to take my children, until her laptop exposed everything. I was bathing my daughter when my phone rang. My sister's name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer because I was trying to rinse shampoo out of Maya's hair. But something made me pick up. Claire's voice came through shaking, and I could tell she'd been crying. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I had to do what's right for the kids. CPS will be there tomorrow morning." She hung up before I could say anything. I just stood there holding the phone with wet hands while Maya splashed in the tub, asking me what was wrong. I didn't know what Claire meant. I didn't understand what she was talking about. I told Maya everything was fine and finished her bath, but my hands were shaking the whole time. The next morning, I found out exactly what Claire meant. Someone knocked on my door around 8:30, and when I opened it, there were two police officers standing there with a woman in business clothes holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as a CPS investigator and said they had a court order. "We receive a report of physical and emotional abuse," she said in this flat, professional voice. "We need to examine your children and your home." I couldn't even process what was happening. They pushed past me into my house and started searching everything. The investigator walked through every room, taking photos with her phone. The officer stood near the door, watching me like I might try to run. I kept asking what report they were talking about, who called them, what abuse they thought happened. Nobody would answer my questions. They took Maya, who's 6, and Devin, who's 9, into separate rooms to interview them. I could hear Maya crying from the kitchen where one officer made me sit. Devin came out first looking scared and confused. Then Maya came out sobbing and ran to me, but the investigator pulled her back. "We found a bruise on Devin's arm," the investigator said, "and Maya seems very nervous around you." I try to explain that Devin plays soccer and gets bruised every single week. That Maya is shy around strangers and scared because these people just barged into our house. They didn't care about my explanations. The investigator looked at me with this cold expression and said, "We're removing the children immediately for their safety. They'll go to emergency foster care." I said no. I reached for Maya's hand, and one of the officers grabbed my arm. "Sir, step back or we'll restrain you." I watched them put my kids in a white CPS van. Maya was screaming for me, her face pressed against the window. Devin was crying. The investigator handed me some paperwork and said, "Don't contact your children. We'll be conducting a full investigation. If the allegations are substantiated, you could face up to 20 years in prison. Your hearing is in 5 days." Then they drove away with my children. The first thing I did after they left was call the foster placement number on the paperwork. I just wanted to talk to my kids for 1 minute, to tell them I love them, and this was a mistake. The woman who answered said, "No contact means no contact. Violation could result in criminal charges." She hung up on me. I drove to Maya's daycare to get her attendance records, thinking if I could show proof she'd been happy there, it would help my case. The director stopped me at the door before I could go inside. "CPS instructed us not to speak with you," she said. "Your sister already collected Maya's belongings. She's been granted temporary guardianship." I just stared at her. Temporary what? The hearing isn't for 5 days. Emergency placement with family members is standard procedure. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave." I went home and checked my security camera system. I had 6 months of footage showing normal family dinners, me helping with homework, bedtime stories. Everything that would prove I was a good father. I went to download the files and realized the hard drive was gone. The cables were cut clean. My sister Claire had a key to my house. She'd been here while I was at the daycare. I called the police to report the break-in and theft. The officer who answered sounded bored. "Sir, your sister has temporary custody of your children. She's legally allowed to collect their belongings from your residence. If you believe something was stolen, you can file a report, but it'll take weeks to investigate." "I don't have weeks. My hearing is in 5 days." "Then I suggest you speak with your attorney." I called the public defender they'd assigned me and explained everything. The deleted footage, Claire's lies, her obsession with my kids. He cut me off halfway through. "Sir, I have 63 cases right now. CPS found bruises on both children. Multiple witnesses support the abuse claims. Your sister has a clean record, stable marriage, and passed a home study in 48 hours. That doesn't happen unless she'd already started the process months ago." "Exactly. She planned this whole thing. Do you have proof of that?" "I didn't." He sighed into the phone. "I'll do my best, but the evidence is overwhelming. I prepare yourself for losing custody." I spent the next day calling everyone who knew my family. Maya's pediatrician, Devin's soccer coach, my neighbors, my late wife's family. Every single call went the same way. Nobody believed me. On day 4, I used my savings to hire a private investigator. "I need you to find proof my sister planned this," I told him. "Search histories text messages, something. He called me back that same afternoon. Sir, I can't take your case. Your sister's lawyer contacted me. Said if I interfere with a CPS investigation, I could lose my license. I'm sorry. The night before the hearing, I sat in my empty house and cried. I tried everything. Calling the kids, gathering evidence, talking to witnesses, hiring help. Nothing worked. Claire had thought of absolutely everything. The hearing was at 10 in the morning. I sat at a table with my public defender. Claire sat across the room with her husband, looking sad and dabbing at her eyes with tissues. Judge Kramer called the hearing to order, and the caseworker presented everything. The bruises, some ER visits I didn't even know about, teacher reports, witness statements from Claire. Then Claire testified. She cried while talking about how much she loved those children like they were her own, how she couldn't watch them suffer anymore. Her husband and her had room for them, she said. A stable home with 2 parents. They deserved better than what I could give them. The judge looked at me. Do you have evidence contradicting these allegations? My lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we can explain the bruises. Devin plays competitive soccer. Do you have evidence? The judge repeated. Before my lawyer could answer, the courtroom door opened. My late wife's best friend, Elena, rushed in holding a laptop. Your Honor, I have proof he didn't do this. Judge Kramer frowned. Ma'am, you can't just burst into my courtroom. Please, Elena said. I found Claire's laptop at her house, and I have her search history. The judge waved her forward, looking annoyed. Elena opened the laptop and started talking fast. 4 months ago, Claire searched how to win CPS case and getting custody of niece and nephew and signs of child abuse to report. She has a folder with fake text messages, templates for bruised photos, a detailed timeline for building a case against him. She turned the screen toward the judge. And she has videos. Videos she recorded of herself telling Maya and Devin that their dad didn't want them anymore. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Kramer studied the laptop for a long time. Then he looked at Claire. Did you fabricate these allegations to gain custody of your brother's children? Claire's face crumbled. I can't have children, she sobbed. They love me. I would be a better mother than he could ever be a father. Judge Kramer's expression hardened. The courtroom exploded with shocked gasps from the few people in the gallery. 2 bailiffs moved toward Claire's table while her husband sat frozen, looking pale. Claire kept sobbing into her hands, but the judge raised his hand for silence. He looked directly at Claire, and his voice was cold. The bailiff stood on either side of her now, waiting. I sat at my table watching this happen, and part of my brain couldn't believe it was real. My sister was about to be arrested. The nightmare that started 5 days ago, when CPS took my kids, might actually be ending. Judge Kramer ordered the bailiffs to take Claire into custody for investigation of perjury and filing false reports. They moved forward and touched Claire's arm. She looked up at them with red, swollen eyes and didn't resist as they helped her stand. Her husband finally moved, reaching toward her, but a bailiff held up his hand and shook his head. Claire was led toward the side door, still crying, and I watched her go, feeling this weird mix of relief and disbelief and anger all at once. The judge turned to me, and his expression was serious but not cold anymore. He explained that while Claire's confession changed everything, CPS protocol required a full reevaluation before custody could be restored. My heart dropped into my stomach. I thought this moment meant I'd get Maya and Devin back right now, today, immediately. But the judge kept talking about procedures and evaluations and proper documentation. He scheduled an emergency follow-up hearing for 3 days from now. 3 more days without my kids. 3 more days of them thinking I'd abandoned them. I felt my public defender's hand on my arm, but I couldn't look at him. Judge Kramer called a recess, and suddenly people were moving and talking around me. Elena rushed over from where she'd been standing near the judge's bench. I stood up, and she threw her arms around me. I hugged her back, so hard my arms shook. She was crying, and I realized I was crying too. She pulled back and grabbed my shoulders and started explaining fast. She'd gone to Claire's house yesterday to drop off some of my late wife's belongings that had been in storage. Claire wasn't home, but the door was unlocked. Elena went inside to leave the box and saw the laptop open on the kitchen table. The screen showed a folder labeled custody plan. She looked at it and found everything. The search history, the fake text messages, the timeline, the videos of Claire talking to Maya and Devin. She grabbed the laptop and drove straight to the courthouse this morning. The CPS caseworker approached our table slowly, her face showing clear embarrassment. She asked if she could speak with me for a moment. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask her how she could tear my family apart based on lies. But I forced myself to stay calm and nodded. She said she needed to interview me again with this new information. She apologized for the initial removal, but explained they have to act on reports of abuse. I just nodded again because I didn't trust myself to speak without yelling. Judge Kramer called us back after 15 minutes. Everyone returned to their seats, except Claire, who was gone now. The judge issued a temporary order allowing supervised visitation starting tomorrow. I was granted 2 hours with my children at a CPS facility, 2 hours with my own kids. After 5 days of being completely cut off from them, it felt like a gift and an insult at the same time. These are my children, and I'd done nothing wrong, but I had to see them in some sterile room with a social worker watching us. My public defender leaned close after the judge finished. He suggested I hire a private attorney now that the case had taken this dramatic turn. He explained that getting custody fully restored and pursuing charges against Claire required expertise he didn't have time to provide with 63 other cases. He pulled out a business card and wrote 3 names on the back. I left the courthouse holding that card and walked to my car in the parking lot. I sat behind the wheel for a minute, just breathing. Then I looked at the first name on the list and put the address into my phone. The office was downtown 20 minutes away. I drove straight there without calling first. The receptionist looked surprised when I walked in and asked to see Clive Doherty without an appointment. I explained my situation in quick sentences. CPS took my kids 5 days ago. My sister fabricated abuse allegations. Her laptop proved she planned everything. I just came from court where she confessed. I need help getting my children back. The receptionist picked up her phone and spoke quietly. 2 minutes later, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a sharp suit came out. He introduced himself as Clive and brought me back to his office. I sat across from his desk, and he listened while I explained everything again in more detail. He asked to see Elena's laptop evidence and the judge's orders from this morning. I pulled out the paperwork, and he read through it carefully. Then he looked up and told me he'd take my case. We needed to move fast and document everything while memories were fresh. Clive explained that even with Claire's confession, I need to rebuild my case from scratch with positive evidence of my parenting. Proof of her lies wasn't enough by itself. I needed to show I was a good father, not just prove she was a liar. We spent 2 hours going through everything. My documentation of normal family life, photos on my phone of Devin's soccer games and Maya's daycare activities, report cards, medical records. By the time I left his office, it was almost 5, and I felt exhausted, but also more hopeful than I'd been in days. The next morning, I arrived at the CPS Visitation Center 30 minutes early. My hands were sweating, and my heart was racing at the thought of seeing Maya and Devin after 5 days that felt like years. I sat in the waiting room, watching the clock. Finally, a social worker came out and led me down a hallway to a small room with toys and a table and chairs. She told me to wait. 5 minutes later, the door opened, and they brought my children in. Maya saw me and ran forward crying. I dropped to my knees and caught her, and she crashed into me sobbing. Devin stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. His face was guarded, and his eyes were red like he'd been crying recently. I held Maya against my shoulder with one arm and reached out my other hand toward Devin. He looked at my hand and then at my face and slowly walked closer. I pulled him into the hug too and held both my children and tried not to cry myself. The social worker sat in a chair in the corner watching us. Maya was sobbing into my shoulder, saying "Daddy" over and over. Devin stood stiff in my arms at first, but gradually relaxed a little. I told him I loved them and missed them so much. Maya pulled back and looked at my face with tears running down her cheeks. She asked why Aunt Claire took them away. I didn't know how to answer that in a way a 6-year-old would understand. Devin pulled away from me completely and took a step back. He looked at me with this expression that was angry and hurt and confused all at once. Then he asked me why I let them take him away. His question hit me like someone punched me in the stomach. He was 9 years old, and he didn't understand that I had no choice, no power to stop what happened. He thought I'd just let CPS take them. He thought I didn't fight for them. I dropped down to sit on the floor with both of them and pulled them close. The social worker in the corner shifted in her chair, but didn't say anything. I looked at Devin's face and saw all the hurt and confusion there. I told him I fought as hard as I could, that I called lawyers and tried to get evidence and did everything possible. But the judge believed Aunt Claire's lies, and I had no power to stop what happened. Maya was still pressed against my side, and she pulled back to look at me with tears on her cheeks. She asked why Claire would lie about me hurting them. I didn't have a good answer for a 6-year-old. How do you explain to a child that a trusted adult fabricated an entire case to steal them away? I settled for telling her that sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices when they're sad. That Aunt Claire wanted kids of her own so badly that she did something terrible to try to take them from me. Devin was quiet for a minute. And he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said that during the 5 days at Claire's house, she kept telling him and Maya that I didn't really want them anymore. She said they'd be happier living with her forever, that she could give them things I couldn't, that I was probably relieved to have them gone. I felt sick listening to this. Maya nodded and said Claire told her the same thing, that Daddy was tired of taking care of them alone. The extent of the psychological damage Claire had inflicted in just 5 days hit me then. She hadn't just lied to CPS and the court. She'd actively worked to destroy my children's trust in me. We sat together on that floor, and I held them and tried to reassure them that none of what Claire said was true. I told them I'd been trying to see them every single day, that I'd hired lawyers and fought in court and done everything I could to bring them home. Devin asked if I was telling the truth, and hearing that question from my own son broke something inside me. But I kept my voice steady and told him yes, absolutely, that I would never stop fighting for them. Maya asked when they could come home, and I had to tell her I didn't know yet, but I was working on it. The 2 hours passed too quickly. We played with some of the toys in the room, and I asked them about what they'd been doing, trying to keep things as normal as possible. But the whole time, I was aware of the social worker watching us and the clock on the wall ticking down. When she finally stood up and said visitation was over, Maya's face crumpled. She grabbed on my shirt and started screaming that she didn't want to go. I tried to calm her down, but she was hysterical, crying and clinging to me while the social worker approached. Devin's whole body went rigid, and his face went blank like he was shutting down emotionally to protect himself. The social worker told me I needed to let Maya go, and I tried to peel her fingers off my shirt while she screamed. Another worker came in to help, and they physically removed her from me while she sobbed. Devin just stood there frozen, not looking at me. I watched them lead my children out of that room, and I couldn't do anything to comfort Maya or reach Devin. I sat in that empty room for a few minutes after they left, trying to pull myself together. Then I drove straight to Clive's office. His receptionist saw my face and brought me back immediately. I told him everything about the visitation, about Devin's question, and Claire's manipulation and Maya's terror of being separated again. Clive took notes and told me this was actually helpful for our case, because it demonstrated the psychological harm Claire had caused. He said he'd already filed a motion for increased visitation and an emergency psychological evaluation of the children by an independent expert. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the man introduced himself as Quentin Walden from CPS. His tone was completely different from the original caseworker, more respectful and professional. He said he was personally reviewing the entire case file in light of the new evidence, and he needed to schedule a reevaluation interview with me for tomorrow morning. I agreed immediately. He mentioned that he'd already reviewed Elena's laptop evidence and spoken with Judge Kramer's office. I could hear in his voice that he actually believed me now. Elena showed up at my house that evening with takeout food. She made me sit down and eat while she cleaned up my kitchen, which I'd been neglecting. After dinner, I broke down crying and told her about Devin asking why I let them take him away and Maya's terror when visitation ended. Elena sat next to me and let me cry, then reminded me that my late wife had trusted me completely as a father. She said that once the truth was fully documented, the kids would understand what really happened. The next morning, I arrived at the CPS office 30 minutes early for my reevaluation interview. Quentin met me in the lobby and brought me back to a conference room. He had a thick file on the table and a recording device. He asked me to walk through a typical day with Maya and Devin before the removal. I described everything in detail. How I'd wake up at 6 and get them ready for school, making breakfast while Devin packed his soccer gear and Maya looked for her favorite stuffed animal, dropping Devin at elementary school and then Maya at daycare, my work schedule, and how I'd pick them up in the afternoon. Devin's soccer practices 3 times a week where I'd watch from the sidelines, helping with homework at the kitchen table, making dinner while they played, bath time and bedtime stories, all the mundane details of single parenting that suddenly felt precious now that they'd been taken away. Quentin listened and took notes, and I could tell he was actually hearing me this time. Then he pulled out photos of Devin's bruise and asked me to explain it. I grabbed my phone and showed him dozens of pictures from soccer games. Devin with grass stains on his knees. Devin with a scrape on his elbow. Devin with various bruises from getting knocked around during plays. I explained that he played midfielder, which meant he was constantly in the thick of the action. His coach could verify that the specific bruise CPS photographed happened during a particularly rough game 3 days before they showed up at my door. Quentin nodded and made more notes. We discussed Maya's nervousness during the original interview. I explained that she'd always been shy around strangers, that being suddenly separated from me and questioned by unfamiliar adults would obviously make any 6-year-old anxious. Quentin seemed to understand. He told me he was recommending increased visitation to 4 hours daily while the full evaluation continued. When I got home that afternoon, Clive called. Judge Kramer had approved the increased visitation starting tomorrow. Even better, the judge had ordered an independent psychological evaluation of all 3 of us by Martha Pike, a therapist who specialized in parental alienation cases. The next morning, I drove to the CPS facility for my second visitation with Maya and Devin. My hand shook less than last time because I knew what to expect now. The social worker brought them in, and Maya ran to me immediately, but her crying was quieter, more controlled. Devin walked over slowly and sat next to me on the floor instead of hanging back near the door. We sat together, and Devin started asking questions about what was happening with the case. He wanted to know when he could come home and if the judge believed us now. I explained that everyone knew Aunt Claire lied, and we were working to fix everything, which seemed to help him relax a little. The social worker took notes from her corner, but mostly stayed quiet. When visitation ended, Devin hugged me goodbye without me asking first, and Maya only cried for a minute before the social worker led them away. My first session with Martha Pike happened the next afternoon at her office across town. She had a calm voice and kind eyes that reminded me a little of my late wife, which made it easier to talk. Martha asked detailed questions about my relationship with each child, how we spent our days, what our routines looked like. She asked about my late wife's death 3 years ago and how we'd coped as a family since then. I told her the truth about the hard days when I felt overwhelmed trying to be both parents. The times I'd lost my patience with Devin's attitude or Maya's tantrums. The moments I'd cried in my bedroom after the kids went to sleep because I missed my wife so much. Martha wrote notes, but her face stayed neutral and supportive. I explained that I wasn't a perfect parent, that I'd made mistakes and had bad days, but I love my children and always put their needs first. Martha nodded and said that honest self-awareness was more valuable than pretending to be flawless. The following week, Martha scheduled separate sessions with Maya and Devin. I paced the waiting room for an hour while Martha talked to Devin, then another hour while she met with Maya. When they came out, both kids looked tired, but okay. Devin told me Martha was nice and that they played games while they talked. A week after the courtroom revelation, a police detective called my cell phone. He said they were investigating Claire's break-in and theft of my security footage and wanted to know if I wanted to press charges. I told him I needed to talk to my lawyer first and called Clive immediately. Clive said filing the report would establish a pattern of criminal behavior and premeditation, which would strengthen the case for keeping Claire away from my kids permanently. I called the detective back and told him I wanted to press charges. The next day, I drove to Maya's former daycare to talk to Rita Campos. When she saw me, she smiled and came over immediately. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a written statement about my parenting for the custody hearing. Rita said yes without hesitation. She told me she'd been horrified when CPS showed up to collect Maya's things. She said that in 2 years of daily drop-offs and pickups, she'd never once seen anything concerning about my interactions with my daughter. Rita described how Maya always ran to me excited at pickup time, how I was patient and kind even when Maya was tired and cranky. From the daycare, I drove straight to the soccer fields where Hudson Travis was running practice with Devin's team. I waited until practice ended and then approached him. He recognized me immediately and asked how Devin was doing. I explained the situation briefly and asked if he'd provide a statement. Hudson said absolutely and told me he'd been shocked when he heard about the CPS investigation. He said Devin got knocked around constantly during games and practices, that bruises were completely normal for a midfielder who played as aggressively as Devin did, that even my neighbors knocked on my door. The elderly couple who lived next door came in and sat at my kitchen table. They told me they'd been questioned by CPS during the initial investigation and that they'd given positive statements about me. They said they'd told the caseworker they'd never heard yelling or seen anything inappropriate in the 3 years we'd been neighbors. They were angry that their statements had apparently been ignored in favor of Claire's lies. The wife said she'd watched me parent Maya and Devin through her kitchen window and had always thought I was doing a wonderful job as a single father. 2 weeks later, Martha finished her evaluation and sent her report to the court. My phone rang that afternoon, and I saw Clive's name on the screen. I answered before the second ring. He told me the report was strongly in my favor, that Martha concluded I was a capable and loving parent, that the children had been thriving before the removal, and that Claire had deliberately manipulated them. I sat down on my couch because my legs felt weak. Clive kept talking, reading parts of the report out loud. The report said Devin's anger toward me came directly from Claire's lies, not from any real problems in our relationship. Martha wrote that both kids showed clear signs of being manipulated and that they needed therapy. She recommended reunification immediately with therapy support for all three of us. Clive said this report basically guaranteed I'd get custody back at the final hearing. 2 days before the final hearing, Clive called again. The district attorney's office had contacted him about pressing criminal charges against Claire. They wanted to know how hard I wanted them to go after her. I spent that evening thinking about Claire sitting in a jail cell and feeling sick about it. Even after everything she'd done, she was still my sister. But another part of me remembered Maya screaming in that CPS van and Devin asking why I let them take him away. The night before the final custody hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that could go wrong. I got up around 3 in the morning and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table going through all the paperwork Clive had prepared. The final hearing started at 10 in the morning. I sat next to Clive at the same table where I'd sat during that first terrible hearing. Judge Kramer came in and started reviewing the evidence. He had Martha's evaluation in front of him, and he read through parts of it out loud. He talked about the witness statements from Rita and Hudson and my neighbors. He mentioned Quentin's updated CPS report that recommended returning custody to me. The judge looked at me directly and asked if I was prepared to support the children through therapy to deal with the trauma they'd been through. I told him absolutely, whatever they needed, I would do anything to help them heal. My voice shook a little when I said it, but I meant every word. Judge Kramer reviewed more paperwork, and then he made his ruling. He said full custody was restored to me immediately starting today. I felt my whole body go weak with relief. The judge kept talking, saying all three of us had to do family therapy for at least 6 months. Then he issued a restraining order preventing Claire from contacting me or the children, and he referred her case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. After the judge left, Clive told me I could pick up Maya and Devin from their foster placement that afternoon. The relief hit me so hard I actually felt dizzy. I drove to the foster home that afternoon with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I parked in front of a regular-looking house with toys in the yard and knocked on the door. A woman answered, and I told her who I was. She smiled and invited me inside. She called for Maya and Devin, and I heard their footsteps running down the hallway. Maya saw me first, and her face lit up, and she started crying happy tears while running toward me. I dropped to my knees and caught her in a hug, holding her tight while she sobbed into my shoulder. Devin came out more slowly, looking cautious, but hopeful. I reached out one arm to him, and he came closer and let me pull him into the hug too. We walked to my car in the driveway, and I buckled them into their seats, my hands shaking slightly. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine and turned around to look at them. I told them we were going home and staying together, that nobody could separate us again. Devin's face looked worried, and he asked if Aunt Claire could take them away again. I promised him there was a court order preventing her from coming anywhere near us. He nodded slowly, and I saw his shoulders relax just a little bit. The house felt different when we walked inside. Maya wouldn't let go of my hand and follow me everywhere. Devin sat on the couch and watched me carefully, his body tense. That first night was harder than I expected. Maya refused to go to her own room and cried when I suggested it. So I set up blankets on my bedroom floor for both kids. That night, Maya had a nightmare and woke up screaming for me around 2 in the morning. I rushed to where she was sleeping and held her while she cried. She told me she dreamed Aunt Claire came to take her away again. I rocked her back and forth and told her it was just a dream, that we were safe now. Our first family therapy session with Martha happened 3 days after we got back together. Over the next several months, we slowly rebuilt what Claire had broken. Devin's anger outbursts gradually decreased. Maya's separation anxiety improved. We had good days and hard days, but we were together. 6 months after reunification, Martha scheduled a progress evaluation. She told me we made remarkable progress in rebuilding trust and processing the trauma. She recommended reducing our therapy frequency from weekly to bi-weekly sessions, which felt like real validation. The district attorney offered Claire a plea deal. She would plead guilty to filing false reports and child endangerment in exchange for 5 years probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. The deal included permanent supervised visitation only if I ever chose to allow contact with the kids. The sentencing hearing happened a month later. Claire sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered. When the judge asked if she wanted to make a statement, she stood up and her voice cracked as she apologized. The judge accepted the plea deal and sentenced her to 5 years probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Devon's soccer championship game happened on a cold Saturday in early December. The score was tied with 2 minutes left when Devon got the ball at midfield. He dribbled past two defenders and took a shot that curved perfectly into the upper corner of the net. After the final whistle, Devon ran straight to me and hugged me in front of his entire team. In that moment, I realized we had truly rebuilt what Claire tried to destroy. Maya told me one night at bedtime that she loved me all the way to the moon and back infinity times. Those were the exact words my late wife used to say to the kids before she died. Our final therapy session with Martha happened after 10 months of weekly meetings. She told us we'd done the hard work of healing together. Devon asked if that meant we were fixed, and Martha laughed and explained that families are never completely fixed because life keeps throwing new problems at us. But we'd learned how to talk through hard things and support each other. The next Sunday afternoon, we went to the park where we'd scattered my late wife's ashes 3 years ago. Devon and Maya ran off to play on the swings while I sat on our usual bench watching them. I watched my kids play together without fear or sadness weighing them down. We were not the same family we were before all this happened, but we were whole again in a different way. We were moving forward together, and that was what mattered.
Alright, that's it for today. See you in the next one.